I picked the remote control up and switched channels.
Hey man, I was watching that. Yeah, me too. Switch it back.
It was so annoying living in an orphanage. I never had any time on my own. I was always surrounded by other kids. Okay, calm down. I turned the channel back over. I'm going up to my room anyway. I stood up, but just as I was about to walk out, Mrs. Parker, our warden, came walking in.
Michael, I have some great news for you.
What?
A family wants to come to see you. They are looking for a child to adopt.
My mouth fell open in shock. I was 15 years old. I didn't think anyone would ever be interested in adopting someone my age. But hold up, have you subscribed yet? Quick, do it now. And hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on any more crazy stories. Mrs. Parker had told me to put on my best clothes and go to her office at 3 o'clock. I stood outside her door. My hands were sweating and my stomach was full of butterflies. What if they don't like me? I was trying not to get my hopes up, but I couldn't help but think about what it would be like to have a family of my own. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door.
Come in.
I opened the door and went in.
Hello there, Michael. This is Mr. and Mrs. Jackson.
I looked at the couple sitting at Mrs. Parker's desk. They looked to be in their 40s. The woman was very pretty and the man had a kind-looking face. I smiled at them. Hello.
Hello, Michael. Why don't you come and sit down here so we can get to know each other?
I sat on the chair next to Mrs. Jackson.
Do you have anything you would like to ask us?
Will I have my own bedroom?
Yes, of course you will. And a study room too.
I gasped. Wow, that sounds amazing.
Well, we would very much like it if you would like to be part of our family. Would you like that?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's settled then. Mrs. Parker, if you could make the arrangements, please. Of course. I will get right on to it.
It was about a week after our first meeting that I finally got to go and live with Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. I was so excited when they came to pick me up. All the other kids came to wave goodbye to me. As we drove away, I kept on waving until they were out of sight. It only took about half an hour to reach the Jacksons' house.
Welcome to your new home, Michael.
Oh my God, it's huge. They both laughed at me.
Yes, we are very lucky to live here.
I looked up at the enormous mansion. I couldn't believe that I was going to be living there. It didn't take long to settle in. I mean, who wouldn't be happy living in a place like that? My bedroom was amazing. I had a computer and a television all to myself. No more arguing about what show to watch. I also had to change schools. It was too far to travel to go to my old school. I was a bit nervous my first day at my school. You know what it's like when everyone knows everyone already. But I needn't have worried. Everyone was so friendly. I soon had a big group of friends. It was like I had been at the school forever. I was so happy. My life was perfect. But then, one day, it all came crashing down. I was at school and I was feeling really sick, so my teacher sent me to see the principal.
What's the matter, Michael? You don't look well.
I feel terrible, Mr. Bell.
Well, you'd better go home then. I'll call your parents to come and pick you up.
No, it's okay. I can walk home. I live very close.
Okay then. Well, take care then.
When I got home, there was no one there. They must have gone out shopping or something. I was about to go up to my room when suddenly I heard a sound coming from the dining room. I went over and opened the door. I was expecting to see my parents there, but instead the room was full of what I can only describe as a gang of very sketchy looking men. They were sitting in a circle around a whiteboard. I could see that on it was written, "Bank Robbery Plan." My heart sank and the blood drained from my face. Oh God, I've walked in on a criminal gang meeting. I started to quietly back out of the room, hoping that they wouldn't see me, but I accidentally knocked over a chair, and immediately they all turned to look at me. I knew there was nothing else for it, so I ran out of the room. I'd only gone about 5 meters down the hallway when I felt something hit me in the back. As I fell to the ground, I started screaming, "Help! Help!"
You'd better shut up if you know what's good for you.
I was scared to death. Oh gosh, are they gonna kill me? The man took out a scarf and gagged me. I thought I was going to pass out with fear, but then I saw the front door open and my parents walked in. A feeling of relief swept through my body. Everything will be okay now. My mom and dad will save me. But instead of coming to my aid, they just stood there staring at me. Before I had time to wonder what was going on, I felt a sharp thud to the back of my head and I blacked out. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair and was still gagged. There was no one else there. I started trying to call out, but my words were all muffled. The door opened and my parents walked in. My dad came over and took off my gag. "Mom, Dad, those men are criminals. I saw them planning a bank robbery."
Oh, you shouldn't have seen that, Michael. Why did you come home from school?
I was feeling sick, so Principal Bell sent me home. We have to call the police. We can tell them what they were planning.
No, Michael, we won't be calling the police, and we won't be telling anyone of their plans.
Why not? My parents looked at each other and then turned back to me.
Because they are working for us.
I couldn't believe my ears. You're not serious. Wait, are you telling me you two are criminals? My parents started to get really stressed then.
What are we going to do?
Before they had a chance to say any more, I interrupted them. Are you going to send me back to the orphanage?
Heavens no, darling. We love you.
Then what are you going to do?
There's nothing else for it. You'll have to join our gang.
I thought about it for a minute, but I realized that I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to stay living with them, I would have to do as they wanted. Okay, I will. My dad untied me and the three of us went back to the dining room. The men were still there talking about their plans for the bank robbery. Some of them looked at me suspiciously. I could tell they didn't trust me.
What's he doing here? He's our son and he's joining our gang. We don't need another member. What use will he be?
I knew what I needed to do to win them over, I thought quickly. I know the perfect bank for you to commit the robbery. They stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me.
Go on.
You know the National Union Bank on High Street?
Yes?
Well, I've heard that they have very weak security. It would be easy for you to break in there. The men all looked at each other. Then the man that had hit me on the head stood up and walked towards me. My heart started beating madly. Is he going to hit me again? But instead of punching me, he gave me a couple of claps on my back.
Well done, well done. Looks like you'll be a useful member of our team.
Immediately, the atmosphere in the room changed. The men all started smiling at me and welcoming me to their group. I let out a sigh of relief and began to relax. It looked like everything was going to be all right. The bank robbery was planned for the following Saturday. I had spent the whole week going over and over the plans with the gang. There was nothing that could go wrong. All day at school on Friday, I couldn't stop thinking about the robbery. My friends started to notice that I was acting weird too.
Hey Michael, what's up with you today, bro? You're acting all on edge.
Nothing. I'm fine.
Are you sure? You don't seem like your usual self.
Honestly, I'm fine. Probably just a bit tired, that's all. They didn't seem convinced, but they let it go. We usually always hung out together on a Friday night, but I told my friends that I was going to have an early night. I knew that if I spent any more time with them, I might spill the beans about what was being planned for the next day. When I went downstairs the next morning, I found my parents and the rest of the gang finalizing the plans. I wasn't going to be a part of the actual robbery. My parents had said they didn't want me involved.
Okay, so everyone knows their job. Any questions?
Everyone shook their heads.
Okay then, let's go. Michael, you stay here, okay?
Okay, Dad. I watched as they all got into their cars and drove off. But as soon as they were out of sight, I jumped on my bike and sped off after them. I know my dad told me to stay home, but I wanted to see what happened. I stopped my bike in front of a small cafe across the road from the bank and went inside. As I sat there sipping at my Coke, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Everything looked normal over at the bank. No one would suspect that at that moment, someone was inside stealing all of the money. But just as I thought everything was going to plan, something unexpected happened. The air was filled with the sound of alarms going off. I looked out of the window and saw the getaway car pulling up in front of the bank. The next thing, I saw two people running out of the bank carrying bags of money. I immediately recognized that they were my parents. Before they had a chance to get into the car, some policemen that had been in the cafe ran out and grabbed hold of my parents and the other gang members. I watched as they put handcuffs on all of them and arrested them. My heart sank. I was filled with a mixture of sadness and guilt. You see, the reason I had suggested the National Union Bank was not because it had weak security. It was because it was located opposite a cafe that I knew the local police force always had their lunch at. I hadn't wanted to risk calling the police and telling them. I knew that if I had done that, there was a chance that the gang would find out and come back in the future to get their revenge. But now, I had trapped my own parents. I jumped on my bike and raced back home. When I got there, I just managed to get into the house before a police car pulled up. When I opened the door, I feigned surprise. Hello, officer, can I help you?
I am afraid we have some bad news. Your parents have been arrested for committing a bank robbery.
What? No, that can't be true.
I'm afraid it is. They are locked up in jail. They would like to see you.
Of course, yes, I'll get my coat. When I got to the jail, the policeman told me I could go to speak to my parents. When I saw them behind the bars of the cell, I felt terrible. Mom, Dad, are you okay? I can't believe you got caught.
We're okay, darling. We just want to make sure you are okay.
I don't understand what went wrong, Michael. We had the perfect plan. I guess it was just bad luck that those policemen were in the cafe at the time.
I didn't admit that I had known all along they would be there. Instead, I just agreed with my dad. Exactly. I mean, no one could have known.
Anyway, Michael, the reason we wanted to speak to you is to tell you that you don't have to worry about money or anything. We made arrangements before the job to make sure you'd be fine if anything happened to us.
Yes, darling, we are going to be in here for a very long time, so we have left everything we own to you.
You didn't have to do that.
I know we didn't, but we want to. We love you.
I felt so guilty when my parents told me that, but then again, they were criminals, weren't they? But even though I loved living in that big mansion, I couldn't stay there any longer. When I knew they had bought it from the rewards of their criminal life, I sold everything that they had given me and gave all the money to a local charity. I thought that by doing that, perhaps in some way, it might make up for some of the sins my parents had committed. Because I didn't have anywhere to live, I had to go to a foster home. It's nothing like the house that I lived in with my parents, but at least I have somewhere to stay. I'll be turning 18 soon, and I've decided that as soon as I finish school, I'm going to join the army. I want to do something meaningful and worthwhile with my life. I miss my parents a lot. Even though I only lived with them for a few years, they meant the world to me. I wish that things could have turned out differently, but I don't regret what I did. After all, no one should live a life of crime.
Mrs. Davis was the best mother a girl could ask for. She would always tell me the story of how she found me. She said one night right before closing up, she heard the sounds of a crying baby. After searching, she found me wrapped in a blanket in a basket. The only thing she found in the basket was a locket and a note asking her to take care of me and the name my mother had chosen, Brittany. If you want to hear more of this story and stories like mine, like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell too so you'll know when more stories are uploaded. One afternoon while sitting watching the television, Mrs. Davis received a phone call that changed everything. "Hello?" Mrs. Davis said as she placed the phone by her ear. She listened to the person on the other end of the phone and every so often added a, and an, okay. That was Dr. Miller. They got back the results of my test. I tested positive for breast cancer, she said softly after saying goodbye to the person on the phone. I hugged Mrs. Davis and tears ran down my cheeks. For 14 years, she was the only mother I knew and I wasn't ready to let her go. She pulled me away gently and looked into my eyes. "I think it's time to get you a new family." "I don't want a new family," I cried through the tears. "I know, honey, but we need to prepare for the worst, okay? I will make sure you get adopted by a great family," Mrs. Davis said, pulling me close once again. The next few weeks, Mrs. Davis, together with an adoption agency, screened numerous families to make sure that I received the best. The family that Mrs. Davis chose was Mr. and Mrs. White. They had no children and they were billionaires. Could you believe it? The day finally arrived when it was time for me to leave the only home I knew. "Don't worry," Mrs. White said. "You can call Mrs. Davis every day and she is welcome to come and visit any time she wants." I hugged Mrs. Davis. "Bye for now. I'll call you when I get there, okay?" We arrived at Mr. and Mrs. White and they gave me the grand tour of their mansion. The outdoors was equipped with a pool, tennis court, and even a stable filled with horses. "Brittany, please feel free to ask us for anything. We just have one rule," Mrs. White said. I nodded and she continued. "You aren't allowed in the basement. We are currently doing some work down there and it's filled with loose floorboards and tools. We don't want you to get injured, okay?" Mr. White said, placing his hand on my shoulder. I nodded. "I can do that," I said, smiling. Days turned into weeks. I enjoyed living with the Whites, and I called Mrs. Davis every day. She even came to visit a few times. Of all the rooms and things to see in the mansion, my favorite place was the kitchen. Jane was a few years older than I was, and she was the cook's daughter. I stayed in the kitchen for hours baking with Jane or just chatting. One night, I got up for a midnight snack. I was munching on a handful of cookies on my way back to bed when I heard it. A low, soft moan. I thought that my mind was playing tricks as I walked through the dimly lit halls, but I stopped in my tracks when I heard it again. It sounded like a wounded animal. I ran as fast as I could to my room. I locked the door behind me and pulled the covers over my head. I wasn't even hungry anymore. Little rays of sunlight streamed through my blinds before it felt safe enough to get some sleep. I staggered into the kitchen at 12:30 p.m. and sat by the kitchen counter. "You look like something the cat dragged in," Jane said as she stirred the pot in front of her. "Jane," I asked hesitantly, "how long have you worked here?" "Oh, I officially started working here 3 years ago, but I've been coming to work with my mother since I could walk," she says as she prepared sandwiches for me to eat. Have you ever heard any strange noises at night?" I asked as I sipped the juice that Jane set in front of me. No, the staff usually got home at night and we get here at 5 a.m. every morning, Jane said. Is something wrong? No, it's okay, I said. I decided that I would investigate the sounds that I heard, but I would not tell Mr. and Mrs. White about it. That night, I waited until the house was silent before I exited my room. I sat in the hallway for over 2 hours just waiting. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, I said sleepily and yawned. This is a waste of time. I'd better go to bed. As I was walking back to my room, I heard it. The weird noises. I stopped. Where are you coming from? I muttered to myself. I walked slowly down the hall. It was coming from the walls, through the vent. I followed the noise until it led me to the basement. Mr. White did tell me that the only rule was to stay out of the basement, I thought to myself. I heard the sound louder this time and turned the knob on the basement door. It was locked. Damn it, I thought. Tomorrow, I will have to figure out where Mr. and Mrs. White keeps the key. I walked back to bed wondering what was behind the closed door. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. White went on a 2-day conference out of the country. I spent my day in the kitchen with Jane. What's the deal with the basement? I asked Jane. Mr. White has been renovating that basement for 3 years. Not even staff is allowed in there. When he first started the renovations, though, he was acting a bit strange. Jane quickly changed the subject, maybe thinking that she had said too much. So where's the key to the door? I asked casually. Hey, why do you want the key? Jane asked. No reason, I said, and excused myself. I decided to take a walk around the grounds. I walked until I came to the back of the house. There was a window that was almost hidden behind some shrubs. I knelt and peeped in the window. The dust and cobwebs made it difficult to see. I pushed the window, but it didn't budge. I decided to sit on the floor and kicked the window. After the third kick, the window creaked open a bit. I kicked it until it was wide enough for me to fit through. I pushed my head in and peered around before lowering myself feet first. I dangled for a while before I dropped about 2 feet with a thud. I lay on my back for a few minutes before I got up and searched the basement. In the far corner of the basement, there was a long red curtain that started at the top of the ceiling and touched the floor. I walked slowly towards the curtain. I inhaled deeply before pushing the curtain to one side. What I saw was ghastly. It was a small cell. Sitting in the corner of the cell with hands over his head, chained to the wall, was a man. His entire head was covered in a cast. Hello? My voice squeaked with fear. Slowly, the man turned his head towards me. I noticed that he had holes in the cast for his nose, ears, eyes, and his mouth. Hi, the man said. Who are you? I asked, confused. Why are you locked in here? You might not believe me, he said. I crossed my arms. Try me, I said. Mr. White is not really who he says he is, the man said. Mr. White is actually my twin brother, William. And let me guess, Mrs. White is not really Mrs. White? I said, rolling my eyes. Oh no, Mrs. White is Mrs. White. She actually is my wife. She and my brother decided to remove me from the equation and locked me in here. I felt woozy as if the basement was spinning in front of me. This was a lot for a 14-year-old girl to take in. So let me get this straight, I said as I paced the basement floor. You are the real Mr. White, the billionaire. Your wife and your twin brother locked you down here so that they could get your money. My question to you is, why don't you scream for help? Well, I would, but then my staff would be in danger. I already lost one person, and I'm not about to lose another. I am usually heavily sedated, so I'm guessing that Sophia and William are out of the country? I nodded. How long have you been down here? I asked. About 3 years, he said. That's about the time Jane said that something about you changed. That's when the switch occurred, I said. But how do I get you out of here? Where are the keys? The keys are around William's neck. Please don't tell anyone about this. I don't want to put any more of the staff in danger. I nodded. I'll help you get out of this, I vowed. I'll be back as soon as I get the keys, okay? I pushed a table against the wall under the window and climbed out the window. I went back to the house deep in thought. I needed to get the real Mr. White out of that prison. The next few days, I pretended that everything was okay when the Whites returned. I noticed the 2 keys around Mr. White's neck, and I also noticed that he never took it off. I needed a plan, and I needed one fast. I was the real Mr. White's only hope. After about a week after meeting the real Mr. White, I got my chance. Mrs. White went out for the evening, and Mr. White was in his office doing some work. He asked Jane to send him up a cup of coffee. I offered to carry it for her. I knocked on the office door and opened it slightly. Mr. White, Jane said that you wanted some coffee. Thank you, Brittany, Mr. White said, taking the coffee from my hands. Mr. White, I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate everything you and Mrs. White have done for me and Mrs. Davis. I began to wipe the tears from my eyes. Oh, Brittany, you are such a joy to be around, Mr. White said, moving from behind the desk to stand next to me. I'm such a lucky girl. First Mrs. Davis and now you and Mrs. White, I said right before bursting into tears. Mr. White gave me a hug and I wrapped my arms around his neck, hugging him hard, and cried. After a few minutes, I pulled away slowly and wiped my eyes. Sorry to get so emotional, I smiled meekly. No problem. We are so happy to have you here, Mr. White said, squeezing my shoulders. I smiled and exited the office. I opened my hand and revealed the necklace in my hand. I called the police on the way to the basement and told them that there was a break-in taking place and that I was scared for my life and that I was hiding in the basement. The police promised that they would get there soon. I got to the basement and quickly found the right key to unlock the door. I ran downstairs and headed straight for the curtain. I'm sorry I took so long, Mr. White, I said as I moved the curtain to one side and unlocked the cell and then his locks. Thank you so much, I owe you my life, Mr. White said as he struggled to his feet. With one hand around my shoulder, Mr. White and I made our way to the stairs, but there was a hitch in the giddy-up. At the top of the staircase was a deranged and furious Mrs. White with a baseball bat in her hand. And where the hell do you think you two are going? She snarled. Sophia, please, enough is enough, Mr. White pleaded. The both of you will get back into that cell willingly or unwillingly, Mrs. White said as she charged at us. I screamed and Mr. White shielded me. Mrs. White, put the bat down. This is the police, a voice said at the top of the staircase behind Mrs. White. I peeked around Mr. White and watched as Mrs. White dropped the bat. She was handcuffed and taken away. The police took a statement from me and Mr. White. Mr. White was taken to the hospital and I was taken back to Mrs. Davis. I told her all about my adventure. About a month later, we heard a knock on the door. It was Mr. White. He thanked me for everything that I did. He said he wanted to speak to Mrs. Davis about something important. I went to my room and allowed them to chat. After speaking with Mrs. Davis, Mr. White took us out to dinner. During the next few weeks that followed, every time Mr. White called, Mrs. Davis was very secretive. One day I came home from school and balloons and decorations adorned the apartment. I was quite surprised to see Mr. White there. Hi, Brittany. Mrs. Davis and I have a little surprise for you, Mr. White said before handing me a letter. I read the letter. I couldn't believe it. Mr. White wanted to adopt me. So, do you want to be adopted by a white? He asked with a smile. I nodded in excitement. Not only was I adopted, but Mr. White asked Mrs. Davis if she would come live with us at his new home. Life was great for a while, but then it all changed. One night while watching a late-night show, an emergency news broadcast alert interrupted the show. We just got word that a male prisoner just escaped from the maximum prison, the news reporter said. Just then, the doorbell rang and Mrs. Davis got up to answer it, since the staff went home for the night. A few seconds later, Mrs. Davis screamed. Mr. White looked at me and said sternly, "Stay here," before running to Mrs. Davis's aid. The news reporter continued talking. We just got a picture of the prisoner that escaped. My eyes widened in horror as the picture of the escaped prisoner popped up on the screen. It was Mr. White's twin brother, William. What did you think of that story? If this video gets 30,000 likes, then we'll upload part 2 of this video. Thanks for watching! Just then, the doorbell rang and Mrs. Davis got up to answer it, since the staff went home for the night. A few seconds later, Mrs. Davis screamed. Mr. White looked at me and said sternly, "Stay here," before running to Mrs. Davis's aid. The news reporter continued talking. We just got a picture of the prisoner that escaped. My eyes widened in horror as the picture of the escaped prisoner popped up on the screen. It was Mr. White's twin brother, William. Hi, my name is Brittany. After you like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell, click the link to watch the previous video if you have not seen it. Trust me, you will definitely want to know how we ended up in this predicament. My heart skipped a beat as I heard a scuffle taking place at the front door. I ran to the back door to prevent myself from being seen by whoever was at the front door. I hid by the first set of bushes that I saw, which were ones directly under my bedroom window. I stifled a cry as I heard someone rummaging through my things. I was too afraid to peek to see who it was. Maybe it was Mr. White's brother William, or his crazy wife Sophia, who may have escaped too. I watched in horror a few minutes later as, through the bushes, Mrs. Davis and Mr. White were being forced into a dark blue van. From where I was hiding, I could not see the license plate. A few minutes after the van drove off, I waited to ensure that the coast was clear before coming out of my hiding place. I ran inside and called the police. then dialed Jane's number because I did not know who else to call. Mr. White and Mrs. Davis were the only family I had. "Jane! Jane!" I said frantically. "Someone took them! Someone took Mr. White and Mrs. Davis!" "What are you talking about, Brittany? Slow down and tell me what happened." After telling her what happened, Jane told me that she was on her way. I waited nervously, and when the police arrived, they questioned me about what happened.
"Do you have anywhere to spend the night?"
an officer asked. Just as I was about to reply, Jane approached us. "I am Mr. White's cook. Brittany will be staying with me and my family until Mr. White and Mrs. Davis are found." The officer nodded and they left the house. Jane waited while I packed a bag and locked up. I honestly thought I reached the point in my life where I finally got to my happily ever after, but it was not meant to be. Tears welled in my eyes. The last thing I picked up from my room was the pendant that my mother left me when I was a baby. I kept it safe in a box at the back of my drawer. I had not worn it in years because I was afraid I would lose it. I placed it around my neck. Maybe, just maybe, it would bring me some much-needed luck. By the time we got to Jane's house, it was late and everyone was already sleeping. I slept in Jane's room on her bed while she slept on a cot in the corner. She assured me that everything would work out. I drifted off into a restless sleep. "Mrs. Davis, no!" I screamed as tears streamed down my face. "Brittany! Brittany! Wake up! It's a dream! It's okay!" Jane spoke as she shook me awake. My eyes shot open and they darted across the room. "It's okay, I'm here," Jane said as she hugged me tightly. "I came to let you know that breakfast was ready. I'm not sure if I can eat anything." "Come on, at least try. You have to keep your energy up." I tucked my pendant into my top and walked to the kitchen with Jane. Sitting at the kitchen table was an elderly lady. Next to her was a walking stick. "Brittany, this is my mother, Mrs. Hazel. Ma, this is Brittany, the friend I was telling you about." I extended my hand and Mrs. Hazel took it. She looked at me strangely before letting go, but didn't say anything. "Ma suffered a stroke 3 years ago. That's when I went to work for Mr. White full-time." "I wished I went with Mrs. Davis," I cried. Mrs. Hazel squeezed my hand gently. "It will be okay." I nodded my head and forced a smile. "Jane, we need to come up with a plan to save Mrs. Davis and Mr. White." "I know, but we don't know where they are or who they're with. We have absolutely nothing to go on here." As we were discussing possible ways to find Mr. White and Mrs. Davis, the doorbell rang. "I wonder who that could be," Jane said and went to answer the door. Jane returned with a package. "No one was at the door, just this package." "Do you think it was something to do with Mr. White and Mrs. Davis?" I asked. "I hope it does," Jane said, and she opened the package. "But if it is, then they know that I'm here and your family could be in danger." "If they wanted to harm us, they would have done so instead of leaving us this package. We'll be okay." Jane smiled at me. Inside the package was a CD. Jane took the CD and went to the computer and put it in. The video popped up and Mrs. Davis and Mr. White were both tied to chairs, gagged and blindfolded. Between them stood William.
"Why, hello, Brittany. I hope that this message reaches you in good spirits. As you can see here, I have your beloved Mrs. Davis. I'm willing to let her go because she is not the person that I want. I want the person who came into my life and took everything away from me. You ruined everything. But now you have a chance to make it right again. If you hand yourself over to me, I will release Mrs. Davis. Meet me at the abandoned warehouse on Old St. Joseph's Road. If I hear so much as one police siren or see one police officer, you will never see Mrs. Davis again."
The video cut off. Jane and I sat in silence for a few moments. "I don't think you should go," Jane said grimly. "I have to go. We don't know if he's keeping them at the warehouse or another site. If I go, he said he would release Mrs. Davis." "I think we should call the police." "If it were Mrs. Hazel, would you stay at home? If this is what I have to do to save my mother, then I'm going to do it." "I understand what you're saying, but William is dangerous, Britt. You can't take him out by yourself." "I don't have to take him out. I just want him to release my mother. This is something I have to do." I walked away and went to the bedroom. I needed time to think. I took out my pendant and twirled it on my fingertips. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. The door opened. "Look, Jane, I know you don't approve, but—" My face turned red when I realized it wasn't Jane, but Mrs. Hazel. "I'm so sorry, I thought it was Jane." She smiled at me and sat next to me on the bed. She looked at the pendant, then looked at me. "May I see it?" I took it off and handed it to her. I watched as she opened it and tears ran down her face. How did you come by this pendant? I told her my story as she held the pendant to her heart. When I was finished, she got up from the bed with the pendant and walked out of the room. I followed her. Jane looked at us as we passed her. Ma, what's going on? We followed Mrs. Hazel to her bedroom. She opened the top drawer of her dresser and pulled out a picture and handed it to me together with the pendant. The picture she placed in my hand was identical to the one in the pendant. What? Where did you get this? I fumbled. My husband died when I was pregnant with you. He was the sole breadwinner and our livelihood quickly deteriorated. When you were born, I didn't have enough money to take care of you and your sister. I dropped you off at the diner and prayed that I would be reunited with you someday. I felt ashamed for so many years of keeping this from everyone, especially you, Jane. After I got employed with Mr. White, I tried searching for you but couldn't find you. I went back to the diner, but I was too late. The diner was turned into a jewelry store. Jane consoled Mrs. Hazel. I walked out of the room shocked by the news I just heard. I felt torn. Mrs. Hazel was my mother? I found one mother, but I was about to lose another. I sat in the kitchen and Jane walked in. Hey, sis. She smiled and hugged me. I know it's a lot to take in now, but together we'll get through this. How is Mrs. Hazel, or should I say, Mom? She will be okay. A little overwhelmed, but she'll be fine. Let's focus on getting Mrs. Davis and Mr. White back. I decided that if you are going, I will go with you. Jane put up her hand so that I wouldn't interrupt her. Before you protest, hear me out. I will follow you to the warehouse, sneak inside, and get Mr. White and Mrs. Davis out. I can't let you go alone. So it's either I come as your shadow, or we both stay at home. We waited until the cover of night to carry out our plan. I looked around nervously as I entered the parking lot of the warehouse. When I reached the door, I pushed it open. Almost immediately, my hands were tied.
It's nice of you to join us. Let me show you to your quarters.
William smiled sinisterly. I was thrown into a room. I leaned my head on the door, feeling defeated. Brittany? I spun around. It was Mrs. Davis. She quickly untied my hands. Mom, are you okay? I hugged her tightly. I'm okay. What are you doing here? I told her about the package that was sent to Jane's. Where is Mr. White? I asked. I'm not even sure if he's in this building. I didn't want to tell Mrs. Davis about our plan in case the room was wired. I wondered how soon it would take for Jane to rescue us. About an hour passed and I was worried about Jane. Did William find her and throw her into another room? Did she chicken out and decide it wasn't worth it? Just then, I heard the door open. My eyes lit up, but my hopes were crushed when I realized it was William. He slid 2 trays in the room.
Eat up. This is your last meal.
He closed the door behind him. I ran to the door and pounded it with my fists. You said you would let Mrs. Davis go. You said you would let Mrs. Davis go. Neither Mrs. Davis nor I ate from the food that was brought in. My thoughts ran to Jane. She was our only hope. Do you smell that? Mrs. Davis asked, sniffing the air intently. I sniffed the air. Smoke! Mr. White had gone mad. He set the warehouse on fire. Smoke trickled into the room from under the door. Quick, take the sheet from off the bed and tuck it under the door. I snatched the sheet and did as I was told. I wasn't sure how much extra time that would give us, but hopefully enough to get rescued. Help! Someone help us! Mrs. Davis and I shouted. As the room filled with smoke, Mrs. Davis and I stayed close to the floor. We began to cough uncontrollably. I held onto Mrs. Davis. We turned eagerly to the door as we heard it open. It was Jane and Mr. White. They helped us from the burning building, and we all gasped for the fresh night air when we got into the parking lot. Where is William? I asked. Jane scanned the area as we walked away from the building. We stopped at a safe distance and rested. There was a blue van parked to the far side of the parking lot. It's no longer there. But don't worry, I took the license plate just in case. I heard sirens heading our way and I looked at Jane. Did you really think I was letting us come down here without backup? Mom and I just found you, sis. We aren't letting you go so easy.
Sis?
Mr. White looked at Jane and then at me. We nodded. We'll tell you the story soon. Trust me, you're going to love it, I smiled. Soon the parking lot was filled with ambulances, police cars, and fire trucks. We were checked out and the officers took as much information as they could. Jane gave them her number and asked that they call her for any updates on William. Mrs. Davis and Mr. White spent the next few days at the hospital for further observation. A few hours later, as we were sitting in Mrs. Davis's room, Jane got a call. The officer told her that William tried to outrun the police, but he lost control of the van and it slammed into a light pole. He died on impact. I was shocked, but a tiny part of me couldn't help feeling relieved. I spent the next few days getting to know my new family. As soon as Mrs. Davis and Mr. White were released from the hospital, Jane invited them home and we told them everything. This entire experience was a God wink, Mrs. Davis said. What is a God wink? I asked with a raised brow. Well, in this case, a God wink is an event often identified as coincidence, so astonishing that it is seen as a sign of divine intervention. If I'd never gotten the call from the doctor, I would have never looked for a family. If I didn't look for a family, you would have never met Jane and her mom, your real mom. Even my brother had a part to play in it. If he and Sophia hadn't adopted you, you may have ended up in another family, said Mr. White. A God wink, I smiled. Who wants cake? Jane asked as she walked out with a chocolate cake and placed it on the table. We do. One chapter of my life is closed. In this case, everything worked out for the best. Now I have 2 great moms, a dad, and a sister. I think I have finally found my happily ever after.